Okay, episode 27. Here we go.
Did Buddha actually say that? Braun's wearing a shirt right now with a picture of Buddha that says, quote, "You need to let that shit go." And I don't feel like Buddha said that, Braun.
Gautama Siddhartha did say that indeed.
Buddha swears? He
Yeah.
drops the shit
Let
bombs?
that shit go, baby.
Really?
He did say that. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Official quote from the Buddha.
He said a lot of things that you don't know. You better get into the know.
Yes, I better. Was Buddha, do you feel like Buddha was a nice guy? Because we're talking today.
Is that a segue?
That was a segue. You like that?
Into what today? What are we going to talk about?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the nice guy. You know, the whole saying or belief that nice guys finish last.
Do they finish last?
And kind of comparing that to the bad boy. I know, Braun, you probably can relate to this because growing up, like you felt like you kind of identified with that, the nice guy.
Absolutely. Yeah, big time.
Do you feel like nice guys finish last?
I think there's a big difference between nice guys and kind guys. I think that, and that's something that I think I'm going to like differentiate a lot between the characteristics between someone who is being nice and sucking up and needy of attention and approval versus someone who's kind and genuine and generous. You know, big difference. So someone who has that nice guy energy, I think what that really means in this context is someone who is more interested in approval and is unconsciously more concerned with the way other people perceive him rather than how he perceives himself. And if that's how he's maneuvering his life, he's always going to, again, unconsciously alter his behavior, his words, the way he shows up to try and get a certain reaction from people, as opposed to expressing himself and living an authentic life in his power, in his masculine power.
Yeah. As you're talking about this, I'm thinking to myself right now, like who would this episode land with? Who would this episode be for? Is it for the men out there who are perhaps struggling with, like, you know, should I be the nice guy or should I be the bad boy?
Well, I mean, and I think this is actually a really cool conversation for you and I to have. And you and I didn't talk about what we were going to be talking about much when we brought up this topic. But I think it's a really good one for, you know, for a guy and a girl, a brother and a sister to get into, because you can talk about it from like the female perspective as well. And the reason why I say all that is because I don't think that this is just a guy problem. Like, I think that you can be like a nice girl, a kind of female who has those same characteristics, who is always placating to other people's needs and desires of her versus showing up for herself and meeting her own needs and going after what she really wants and expressing who she really is in the world. You know, I think it's not just a guy problem, it's a human being problem. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I think, as you just said, this is a human thing, and the way that I would articulate it is, you know, the whole like nice guy. It's interesting how we've put like this stigma or title around like the nice guy, like nice guys finish last, but you don't hear the phrase like nice girls finish last.
Yeah, I know.
So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, but it's true.
And I think we could dig deeper into that. But to answer your first question, the way that I would articulate it is like the difference between a nice quote unquote nice guy versus the ideally like the healthy masculine. To me, the difference is boundaries.
Yep, that's a big part.
And that applies to both men and women. It's like, are you showing up in the world kind of, this might not be the nicest way of saying it, but like without a backbone?
Yeah.
Do you know who you are, what you stand for? Are you being a people pleaser and willing to just kind of lose yourself, your voice, your values, your boundaries, and putting others before yourself if it means getting the approval and acceptance of others?
I love that you introduced that language in, you know, do you have a backbone? I think that that's really what it means to be a nice guy in this context is you don't really have a backbone. You're not standing up for yourself. You're not showing up for yourself. And yeah, you don't have your boundaries in check in the world and with other people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, like from a dating perspective, early on in my life, I think I did date a lot of the quote unquote nice guy. I think actually probably up until my 30s, I dated the quote unquote nice guy. And I had a few experiences where I actually realized they weren't actually the nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
It was just this image
Yeah.
that they were portraying and
Yeah.
trying to be.
Yeah.
And I think, that is kind of one of the things within this conversation that you start to realize with that like nice guy persona is if you're being the nice guy and just showing up, trying to please other people and always bending to other people's wants and desires and needs, oftentimes you're not showing up in a truthful, authentic, integral way.
Yeah.
You're not always like being really honest with who you are and how you feel about things or a person. If you're always just trying to be liked, you're often, I think, sacrificing authenticity.
Yeah.
And
the ironic thing is the person that doesn't try to be impressive is most impressive.
Well, that was ultimately after having a number of those experiences. Like while I dated the nice guys, I was like, man, these relationships are great. They feel so easy. Like we never fight. We have so much in common. They're always like such great listeners and want to do whatever I want to do. And it wasn't until I had like the ultimate betrayal with one of those relationships where looking back in hindsight, I was like, wow, this person was just like complete chameleon.
Yeah.
They just knew how to adapt to everyone around them. And I know it was coming from a place of like wanting approval and acceptance from other people.
Mm-hmm.
But as I looked back, I was like, I don't feel like I actually knew who that person was.
Right.
Because they were always showing up with this mask, just trying to be loved and accepted and just so willing to sacrifice their own truth and being seen to fit that mold.
For sure.
And so as I got older and had a few of these experiences, I started to find I was more attracted to the man who would speak so honestly that he would like say the thing that I didn't want to hear.
Right.
But I was able to trust that because I'm like, okay, this person is showing up and saying things that like on paper don't really sound great, but I can tell they are willing to risk being loved and accepted in exchange for showing up authentically and truthfully.
Totally.
And that I find is very sexy, very respectable. And that's like how you have truth and trust in a relationship.
Absolutely. And again, I think it's the same for men as it is for women. The most attractive quality, I've been saying this so much for years because I mean, it's the truth. It's not a prolific thing to say, but it is the truth that the most attractive thing about any human being is their willingness to be fucking real and vulnerable, to tell it like it is, to be honest, to express themselves and how they see things in the way that they see it.
100%.
Point blank.
Yeah.
That kind of rawness without being attached to the way other people perceive that truth, it ends up making them more attractive. Not caring about being attractive makes you more attractive.
Right. Yeah. Like being more in love with yourself than the need of others' approval.
Well, that's a really good segue into the opposite end of the spectrum, which would be narcissism, right? In one way, being in love with yourself, that could be perceived as narcissism, right? And that's what ends up happening with a lot of these guys who are, chronic people pleasers, who are nice guys. They realize that that doesn't work because they're not happy. They're not getting their desires met or their needs met in their relationships or their life and in sex. And so what ends up happening is they go to the completely other end of the scale and they stop giving a fuck about anybody's feelings and they only are focused on themselves. They become essentially narcissistic assholes. And the interesting thing is like, on that side of the spectrum, it does get results with, like, if we're talking about dating, it does get results with women in the short term, but
like the narcissistic guy will get the women.
I mean, a lot of the time he'll probably attract other women who are needy themselves to some degree. They don't have the self-respect to see past that narcissistic facade
Yeah, because I think a healthy woman who's like integrated and healthy
isn't going to be attracted
is
to
not
that.
gonna like that.
Yeah, she might find some of his characteristics attractive, the parts of him that really don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Because that is attractive.
Someone who comes across that confident.
Correct. The difference between the narcissistic guy and the nice guy is the narcissist doesn't care about what anybody thinks, and the nice guy cares about what everybody thinks. And so the goal, the sweet spot, is to be in the middle where you simultaneously care what other people think, but not more than what you think about yourself and your own values. So there's, to me, like the sweet spot is really about respect. It's about respecting other people, i.e. being a kind individual, not a nice individual. I mean, it's semantics but you know what I mean in the context. You're the sweet spot being in the middle. You're kind and you care about what other people think, but not so much that it will jeopardize your own behavior about how you show up in the world in a negative way.
And I think, like you said, it's like really realizing that when you show up that way in the world, like so many of us, I think, do have this underlying belief that if we show up where we are the ultimate people pleaser and we're so nice and we're just willing to sacrifice, our schedules and our time and say yes to everyone and everything, that is what's going to that's what's really going to get us liked and loved. But like you said, Bron, it's like when we start showing up with boundaries and knowing who we are and being okay to stand for those things, I think, I don't know so much in friendships, but I'd say definitely in romantic partnerships, that is really attractive to see somebody showing up that way. It's like, as
100%.
we were kind of talking about in the last episode, it's like if you're just starting to date someone and, like let's just say, for example, I don't know, you go out on a date and they try to put the moves on you. Like say they want to hit a home run on the first date.
Right.
And you're like, like that's just not how I roll.
Yeah.
I actually really like to take the time and getting to know someone. And to me, that's a really like sacred, intimate thing. So I want to like connect on a deeper level before I do that. And that's just how I am. For some people, that might be a really hard thing to articulate. But I think that if you're with a person who they themselves actually, people are always going to meet you where they're at, right? So if you're with someone who's not just trying to get laid, but you're like dating someone who actually wants a deep, passionate, fulfilling relationship, that's going to be a really like something really attractive, I would imagine.
Totally.
The fact that you have that boundary and are okay to own that.
Totally. Yeah.
And that's just one example. I think you can think there's so many different ways that could show up.
To be honest with you, I'm trying to understand how that relates to being a nice guy.
Well, a nice guy or a girl.
Right.
Like I'm just picturing oftentimes in like a male-female dynamic, like oftentimes dudes want to get laid right away.
Right.
And I think sometimes as women, we might feel pressure or, that expectation that we can't say no.
Right.
And we have to, there's like this weird societal thing of like, especially if they're taking you out for dinner and buying drinks, like there's going to be this expectation.
Right.
And someone might feel the pressure, a woman might feel the pressure to then have to like hook up.
Right.
But to have the self knowing that, no, that's not how I roll, and to be able to communicate that and articulate that. If you're with a man who's not just like looking for superficial getting laid, he's going to appreciate that. He's going to be like, wow, this woman knows who she is. She has standards. And that's probably going to make him, be even more attracted to you.
100%. Thanks for making that clarification. I wasn't 100% sure. And that's why I love this conversation, because you're getting to add your perspective from the female.
Yeah. I think ultimately there is a risk if we show up being more authentic and having those boundaries. There is always a risk that the person on the other end is not going to like it.
Right.
They might not want to go on another date. But ultimately, by showing up this way consistently, you are going to weed out the weak. You're going to weed out the ones who aren't the right fit, and you'll be more inclined to get that right partner.
Yeah. One thing that I think is underneath this people pleaser, nice guy or nice girl facade, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this too, is that like when I peel that back, I see a lot of anger for people. You know, it's like there's anger for not being seen, not being heard, not being loved. In other words, the reason why they believe they have to be nice is to get that love and connection. And when they don't get that love and connection met, they feel really, really angry. And I can relate to that because I lived most of my younger life like that.
As you were saying that, my thought was, I don't know if it is the same for men and women because, and maybe this is just speaking to my experience and some of the women that I know in my life, whereas like, I feel like a lot of us grew up, I think a lot of women grow up being taught to put other people already before ourselves. It's like we grew up seeing our mothers who are putting oftentimes the kids, the husband, everyone else before themselves. And I think there's a lot of societal teachings and messagings that teach girls from a young age to be the quote unquote nice girl and people pleaser.
Right.
And so as I look back, as you were asking that question, that was a great question. I'm like, I don't feel like I had the anger when I was younger and I was that like nice girl. Like I think I grew up that way. The anger came when then I started dating and I felt like men took advantage of that.
Right.
And I felt like then I was a doormat because I wasn't used to people taking advantage of that.
Okay.
And I had a number of experiences where like I just assumed that these partners that I was dating had the same good intentions that I
Right.
did, were also nice humans. And then to like really understand what was going on, that, you know, they were quote unquote players or whatever, like just doing not the most ethical, nice things.
Right.
That's when the anger kicked in.
Exactly.
And that's when, for me, I went from being, I don't even know if I would say like the nice girl. I think that's just like I said, I think that's just how a lot of girls grow up, is just being like already that way. And then when that shift happened, I remember dating someone in particular where a shift happened where I was like, okay, fuck this. I am not going to be this nice person anymore.
Right.
And then I think I kind of became, it's so different for men and women because I think then I became kind of quote unquote the player, if you will. But it's like men are, in my experience, men were always down for that. You know, it's like a lot of men in my experience were always down to just like be casual and hook up. And oftentimes when I showed up that way where I didn't want anything serious anymore and I didn't care, then they wanted me even more.
Right.
And so I went, but it was genuine. It's not like I was like trying to play a game. I just like genuinely was loving being single.
Right.
And didn't want to commit to any of them. And full disclosure, I was never the type to sleep around, so I wasn't having sex with any of them.
Right.
Or maybe a few of them.
Sure. what were you doing?
But just like going out on dates,
Right.
like, you know, like it was
teasing.
like, that was one of the most fun periods of my life, to be honest,
Yeah.
was that time, because I had all these different dudes. I went from being what was kind of like a bit of a doormat where
Yeah.
I was like chasing relationships and chasing love, to then I'm almost glad I had that experience of being like, fuck you, because then I wanted to just do Danae and be alone. And then I had all of a sudden this huge shift where like, wow, now all these men are chasing me
Yeah.
and wanting to be with me. And so I think that taught me a really healthy balance of, okay, I still want to show up being like an honest, good person, but I also have the desire now for someone to have to work for my love. I'm
Yeah.
not going to be so easy and ready to just give it away to anyone and everyone. Like, this person is going to have to prove that they are worthy of being in my heart, my
Right.
mind, my body,
Right.
all of these things.
And how sexy is it for a man to be like that for a woman? You
Oh
know,
yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's rare. The amount of men who look at women in a way where they are basically assessing, is this girl good for me? As opposed to, how can I get the girl? There's
Right.
way more men asking themselves, how can I get the girl, than there are men saying, is this girl good enough for me? Does she meet my desires? Is she a match for what I really want? Most men are just trying to get approval.
Yeah. And the way that I have experienced that though is like most men are, and once again, I've often dated the avoidance. So this has been my experience. Most men are just trying to get laid.
Correct.
And
they're trying to get approval through sex. Yes.
Yes. And to meet a man who shows up and connects and interacts with you and looks at you as a human that he is getting to know to see if you are a compatible match versus looking at you as a piece of meat and an object to obtain.
Yeah.
That is hot as fuck.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
women, some men are very good actors, but I would like to say a lot of the time you can sense that, especially once again, as of last week in our last week's episode, that's how I was like, take your time, get to know them over time. Don't have sex with them right away because those things unveil over time.
For sure.
You know?
Yeah. I think I want to speak to just a little bit more about the difference between that bad boy archetype versus the nice guy. And I think, again, like I really do see it as a scale. And on one end of the scale, there's this nice guy. And on the other end of the scale, there's this narcissist, essentially. And being in that middle where there's a sense of self-respect, self-honor, a desire to be the best version of themselves that they can possibly be. So there is a genuine care and interest in themselves, like the narcissist has. But the difference between the narcissist and that guy is that they still want to show up in the world and be a good human being. They genuinely give a shit about other people's emotions. They're not just using someone. They are that attractive male, that attractive human being who actually does have an interest in creating value in the world and creating value in relationships as well. And he knows that he can only do that by communicating and connecting with women who are a genuine match for his values and what he wants out of life too. So it's not like he's pursuing women or a woman just for the hell of it. He's doing so because she is on the same wavelength. She's moving in the same direction as him.
Yeah. I think if there are any men out there who are listening, like what do women really want? I don't mean to speak on behalf of all women, but this is just my perception is like, we want a man who is, in the past, I think a lot of us in society were living on this like animalistic level, and we are now evolving as a species. And I think women have really, especially I talk to a lot of my girlfriends nowadays who are like, really doing the inner work. They're getting to know who they are on a deep level. They're doing the healing work. They're getting connected to their passions and careers and so on and so forth. And so like to find a man who is also not just living on that animalistic, wants to have sex, wants to just please kind of this like surface level way of living life, but is actually also willing to go deep within himself and confront, and that means confronting all the shadows, the darkness, the good, the bad, and to find those things within himself, his passions, his purpose, his mission. And when I think whether it's a man or a woman, once you are in that place, you are going to have boundaries. You're going to have a backbone. You're not going to be a people pleaser. And you're going to have expectations for your life, and that includes a partner. And when someone comes to the table where that is evident, that is, I just got goosebumps saying it because it's just like, that is a hot ass human.
Yeah, absolutely. Man or woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I love talking about this with you, guy, girl, man, woman. There's both perspectives. And to me, just having this conversation affirms what I've always had a sense of. This isn't like about nice guys.
No.
This is about that character, those characteristics of being a nice human being, whether you're male, female, or however you identify. It's that characteristic of caring way more about how other people perceive you than how you perceive yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like what the most attractive thing to what you just said, what do women really want out of a man? A woman wants a man to be what he wants to be. And in order for a man to be what he wants to be, he has to know who he is. He has to live his life on purpose, conscious purpose.
Yeah.
Not just those animalistic desires like you were saying.
Yeah. You really got me thinking with that whole question about, my experience of going from like the good girl just essentially thinking about the differences of men and women, like, do you feel like boys also grow up being taught to be nice boys?
Yeah, absolutely. We're all domesticated into believing we have to behave in the same way that our parents want us or our caregivers want us to behave in order to please them. And that makes us perform, right? That makes us act a certain way in order to get that love, that approval, that safety to some degree.
What's coming to my mind right now is how I feel like for boys growing up, this feels even more confusing potentially, because I don't think it's a good thing for females that growing up, I think there is a lot of societal programming that we're just supposed to be like the nice, sweet, nurturing, take care of everyone, put everyone else before you. I don't think that's a positive thing, but I think for boys growing up, I could see this being even more confusing because on the one hand, there is this messaging that to be a man is to be like rugged and tough and independent and, you know, kind of maybe rough around the edges, maybe a little bit bad boy. Like you don't, I think as girls growing up, we're not encouraged to be the bad girl. There's not a cool bad girl stigma, the same as there is a bad boy stigma. And so like I've often heard it talked about where like young boys are kind of conditioned growing up to be a little bit more like girls in that oftentimes growing up, it's like the school system is predominantly female teachers. There's a lot of feminine and female involvement in the development of young boys. And I could see that creating this like expectation that, yeah, the desire is to get the female approval then through that female lens. But I think for a lot of boys growing up, there's not a lot of healthy masculine, like, I don't know, how many like great male figures, role models, teachers did you have growing up that taught you what it is to be a healthy man?
100%. None.
So it's almost like kind of confusing for boys because like I said, I think for women, once again, it's not a good thing that we're taught. I think the feminine expectation and mold isn't ideal, but at least like we're kind of shown what it is. Whereas for boys growing up, you guys are shown more of the feminine way of being without actually being shown like what it is to be a healthy masculine.
Yeah. I also think like the idea of what it means to be a man in this modern day has been totally misunderstood. And I think ultimately, you know, a mystery in the sense that we're still figuring it out. I think that it comes down to a lot of what we've already expressed though, and that is about becoming a self-actualized human, whether you're a male or female or however you identify. We all have masculine and feminine attributes to our character. And what it means to be in alignment with your healthy masculine is to be self-aware about your natural expression in the world. What kind of life do you actually want to live?
And not just be living as per what society tells you you should be doing.
Exactly. What does it look like for you as a human being, whether you're male or female or however you identify, what does it look like for you to go out into the world and say what you mean and mean what you say, to express yourself with authenticity and boldness?
Yes.
And what does it also mean to act in the world the way you really want to act?
Yes.
What do you actually want to do?
Yes.
How do you actually want to move? Who are you? What is the honest expression of that? That is healthy masculinity. That's what it means to be in alignment with that healthy masculine, as opposed to walking on eggshells, tiptoeing, making sure that I'm quote unquote doing it the right way, and constantly questioning if I'm, maybe going to offend someone, or, if I say it like that, or if I do that, are they still going to like me? It's like, fuck all of that. You know, I always like to think like, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. Do what you're going to do. And if it offends somebody, reflect, listen, because what you said might be out of line. And if it is, apologize. Right? I think a lot of people, you know, you look at Andrew Tate, for example, who's like a total narcissistic maniac, in my opinion. The way he presents himself, he gives zero fucks about what anybody thinks, but he simultaneously has no remorse, Like the idea of him apologizing for something is like it would never happen because he's so domineering, you know, and that's why so many young guys have taken such a strong liking to him, is because what he is demonstrating is power, right? And the kids that are seeing him are looking at that and they're like, oh, that feels good. That feels masculine.
Yeah.
But what's missing from that is love and connection.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you could even say that power without love is narcissism.
And I think that's really good for the female audience listening as well. When you're out there in the dating world, like that power, like a man who is an alpha can be super attractive, for sure. But to make sure that, does he also have a heart? Is he also a good person who is going to take your wants, your needs into consideration and care about the human that you are?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Like, as you were talking, it made me think back to, I remember when I was in, you know, my 20s or 30s dating, and I used to always say to my best girlfriend, I was like, man, the dating pool, I felt so frustrated because it felt like I would say to her, I feel like it's either the, you know, kind of the player douchebag dude, or the other side are like men who are kind of robots.
Yeah.
And they don't know who they are, and they're just walking this earth kind of soulless, just doing what society has told them to do. And I mean, I've got a ton of compassion for that, because for a long time, you know, that's what the men of the world were taught to do. We're literally told and taught to be soldiers, robots, to go to war, not care about, you know, what made them happy, what felt good. They had to sacrifice to provide for their families. But now we've evolved to this point where, like, you know, I think a lot of women are very conscious that we want more out of life and our partnerships. And I don't think society has done a really great job of teaching or showing men how to catch up and how to really move beyond that way of living.
I love what you're saying, and I'm really happy you're talking about this right now. And I can see that it's making you a little bit emotional.
Well, it's just, it's sad.
Yeah.
Like, it's sad for everyone, because I see so many women who really want a fulfilling partnership, and a lot of women who are really struggling in the dating pool to like find that. You know, I've had my own struggle with that for the longest time. And then I have a lot of compassion for men who just, until this point in time, have never really been encouraged or taught to dig in and be with their emotions. They've been taught to just be hardened and don't cry, suck it up. And now all of a sudden we're expecting men to have the same emotional ability and capacity that we have, but no one's ever really taught them.
Yeah. Not only have they not been taught, but like you said, they have been taught to repress that. And it's like, you wonder why the suicide rate is so much more higher amongst men than they are women. And that's kind of circles me back to why I see so much anger there, is because the patriarchy has not only had this negative influence on women, but it's also had a very negative influence on men in this way, that men have been taught to serve the country, serve the government,
serve your partner, your family.
And it's like, yeah, what about him? What about his voice? What about his needs? What about his desire? And I mean, I think about all of that, and again, it just makes me think, like, this isn't just a man or a woman problem. These are human being problems. This is really about repression of the human spirit. And this is ultimately a call to open up and ultimately wake up to the voice inside of you that has felt like it hasn't been allowed to express itself so that it can have a voice in the world. And recognize that that is a part of the work, that when you do open up, that is actually the only way that you actually can get love that you are really craving inside.
Yeah. I think it's also a call to have more compassion for yourself, but for the opposite sex. I think it's been very easy to look at the opposite sex and to feel frustrated, to feel angry, to start becoming such a cynic that you're just like, there are no good men out there. You know, there are no good women, but it's like, there are just a lot of wounded people out there.
Totally.
And yes, that is incredibly frustrating when you're dating, but this is where we have to be really discerning with who we allow in. And yeah, not everybody gets an access pass into your heart. And that's for me, like when I started dating, it was like the number one thing that I'm looking for is someone who's into personal growth.
Yeah.
Someone who's been to counseling.
Yeah.
And I see so many people choosing romantic partners based on, jobs, money, appearance. And it's like, yeah, those things are nice, but like if they are not digging in and doing the healing work, then there's going to be limitations to your relationship.
Yeah, totally.
So I think, I don't know, for me personally, I am on the female side of things. I'd love to hear your perspective. On the female side of things, I am always incredibly grateful for men out there who are leading men's growth movements. Like I love the Connor Beaton podcast, like Man Talks, and Stefano Sifandos on Instagram.
Yeah.
I love when I was single and I was really, because I went through my period where I was like really angry at men. I was just so frustrated at just like trying to find this like evolved man who had done the work and just continually not meeting that man. I was so frustrated and starting to become such a skeptic, like didn't believe in them anymore. And so if you are that woman, what I found was like following these healthy, conscious men on Instagram and hearing them speak really helped instill this belief of like, okay, there are men like this out there in the world. So not only did that shift that belief internally for me, but just like supporting the men who are doing this and encouraging this, because I think like we are at a time in society where like men, are finally being encouraged. There's no longer as much of a stigma around like, yeah, dude, talk about your mental health.
Yeah.
It's okay to not be okay. So like the more that we're encouraging men to do that and to encourage your partner, your fathers to do this work and to open up, like you're not a sissy anymore for being with your feelings. It's now being encouraged.
That's right.
Thank God for everyone.
Yeah.
For the children of the world, for the partners of the world, for the men out there who, like you said, the suicide rates are so high. It's just, this is a huge thing that we've needed in society. And I hope that it continues, more and more men continue to step into that role.
Well, the interesting thing too is that, and I think the big reason why there's so much resistance for people in general, but men especially, is that when they do start opening up, it's like, yeah, those raw emotions that didn't just come from their life. It's generational too.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And when they open up, there's all sorts of emotion, from anger to rage to depression to apathy. There's so many different kinds of emotions that come up, and it can at first feel like your life is going to get tipped upside down. And I think that's the reason why there's a lot of resistance for so many people to step into a therapist's office or to start going on a personal spiritual growth path, is because you're opening up wounds and it's extremely uncomfortable, and it does take a lot of courage. But the irony is that when we do that, that's when we can actually be the kind of person that we ultimately want to be in the end, who feels the kind of love that we felt like that we were missing out on all along. In other words, we can be the love that we were looking for.
Yeah.
And that's like the greatest gift that therapy, counseling, coaching can give, I think.
And if you were working with, like a qualified, somebody who knows what they're doing, counseling coach, they're going to know how to walk you through that in a slow way, where it's like the dam isn't just going to break open and you're going to be with all these emotions and now you're going to feel so dysregulated. Like that's the counselors were literally trained and taught how to do that in a slow, titrated way so that it's manageable and your life isn't feeling,
That's right.
One thing I'm curious about is, what about this whole conversation around, like I've heard guys say, my partner wants me to open up and feel things, but when I open up and feel things, then like it's too much and she's turned off. So it's like, feel things a little bit, but not too much.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really depends on the situation. I will say that no matter what, the healing journey, the opening up and being vulnerable for anybody, not just men, it can be uncomfortable. It can be messy, and you can let out stuff that will not be pretty, that won't be attractive, but it's a part of the process. And I mean, ideally, you want to reserve a lot of that messy stuff to be taken care of while you're working with your coach, counselor, therapist. And hopefully you're in a relationship where there is a sense of safety and love and support that is unconditional, to recognize it's like, you know, if I'm thinking from a woman's perspective, it's like, my man's doing the best he can. And I have to respect him for showing up and doing the work as best he can. And if he is quote unquote oversharing or saying or expressing too much, I mean, at least he's showing up and doing the work.
Yeah. And I think a big part of it is the partner that you choose. Like ideally you would be with a partner who would have that same value, where it would be appreciated if you are showing up that way. And I think sometimes maybe there is still some like lingering societal programming of like, a lot of our fathers and grandfathers grew up very stoic and very like mysterious, pushed down their emotions. They were told not to feel them. And so like oftentimes it is normal for us to choose partners who resemble what we grew up with.
Yeah.
So if you grew up with a father who didn't express his emotions, that might, I mean, that there I think is a component of like, where is your partner at in their healing? Are they encouraging of that? Or is that for them not ideal because of their growing up and that they haven't healed that? My other thought around that is, you know, from my perspective, where I'm at right now in my life, I love it when my man opens up and shares and is emotional. I think the key here is your female partner probably doesn't want to be your mother. That's not a sexy dynamic to have in a romantic partnership.
Well said.
So if you, in once again, my experience, if a man is coming to me and he is continually, you know, opening up about his struggles, getting very emotional, and is not doing anything about it, is not doing the work to like, go to a counselor, get better, take action, and just over time is going to rely on me to be the thing that makes, like, to soothe him. It's almost like we as women sometimes can get put into that kind of like mothering role.
Right.
And that's dynamic is not attractive, I think, for the male or the female over time. And I've totally gotten into that dynamic so many times in the past.
Yeah. If a man is in that position, he needs to be working with a strong male counselor, therapist, coach. He needs to be working with a man who can simultaneously hold space for those raw, uncomfortable emotions and hold him accountable for being a strong man at the same time.
Yeah, I think, like, as you said that, I was like, oh, I feel like a man could also work with a female coach, but I feel like there is such benefit in men learning from other men and having healthy masculine role models and mentors. Like, I think that is very, very much so needed in our world.
Yeah.
If a man goes to like a female, it can continue to just create that childhood dynamic of when he was like trying to please the teacher and the mom and...
Totally.
Yeah,
and like,
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Like a female for a man like that, it's just not going to be ideal because she too is going to be looked at as that like motherly figure potentially, unless she also has a really strong masculine presence and can fucking hold him accountable while holding space for him at the same time.
Yeah, I think a lot of men who've been in that like people pleaser, nice guy mode, that's what they need, is that strong masculine to help them step into that side of themselves. Yeah. Okay. Good conversation, Braun.
Very good.
Yep. Hopefully you guys got something out of that, or that was interesting. It's a fun little chit chat for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Necessary.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
See you next week for episode 28.
See you then.